Welcome to B2B Noble.
That's right, no double speaker gibberish, no talking heads. This is a safe place to talk about what you as professionals in the space can do to look like heroes to your bosses, make sales very happy, bring success to the organization, and that bottom line. Let's get started.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of B2B No Bull, where we try to avoid the fluff, we dodge the buzzwords, and we just like to talk about what's really working in business today. I'm Liz Brohan.
And I'm her brother, Mark, the guy who translates business jargon back into English, and you're welcome.
Well, we like that about you.
Very polite. I'm very polite,
You know, we'll do a little bit of that today for sure, because today, everybody buckle up. We are going to be talking about innovation. And we are talking with an individual who has been an innovator for, get this, over 45 years in his career. His career spans, 4 continents, 10 countries, and countless industries, more than you and I probably even know they exist. So we're super excited to have Richard Guha with us today.
Hi there. Thanks for the welcome, Liz. I look forward to talking to you.
Absolutely. I'm going to tell everybody a little bit more about you before we get started on our topic today. I've known Richard for a while now. I've always considered him brilliant. I think everybody that knows him would agree with me there. He's the former CEO of a Fortune 100 company. He has been the CMO of more than 2 companies. He's a strategist, a consultant, mostly to the Fortune 500. They seem to love him. And of course, he's a startup. He's had startups. He's an innovator. He's a board member, he's a founder, and now you're a professor, right, of sorts?
I am indeed. I'm now actually having a lot of fun with a completely different experience, which is teaching undergraduates and graduate students and even some members of faculty, which is I've been doing for a few years now, and it actually forces me to codify a lot of my experience in a way which is easy to communicate to people.
I think that's fantastic. I'm just going to tell everybody that, Richard was a mentor of mine. He taught me everything I needed to know.
Really?
And about the energy industry, right? Which was very complex. And my little pea brain, had to try its best to absorb all of that information.
Yeah, branding electrons is a challenge.
I can't let that pass. This pea brain thing. This sister of mine built one of the most successful ad agencies in Chicago and ran it for 30 years. So let's set the record straight on that,
Oh, indeed, yes. I'm well aware of that.
Well, thanks, everybody. So let's get down to our topic today. We want to talk about innovation, and particularly because, Richard, I think you believe that at least most B2B companies are not being very innovative. Certainly, if they were to choose to be more innovative, they would have a competitive edge. So that's kind of number one. And then the second thing I think you believe is that innovation doesn't necessarily come from great, big, exciting new ideas, right? It often comes from understanding and solving the pain points of your customers. So tell me, did I get that right?
Yeah, I think, and actually I'd broaden it. It's not just B2B. I think a lot of companies, big companies, are not as innovative as they should be. And when I say innovative, there are often people within them who've got great ideas, but they tend to be resisted, almost whatever kind of industry you're in. And when you look at the life cycle of a Fortune 500 company, it's actually surprisingly short. Very few last more than 20, 30 years at the top of their game. They then tend to fail. Obviously, famous ones we hear about is companies like Kodak and Polaroid, which, by the way, are as much B2B much B2B as they were consumer. They missed opportunities. Sony missed opportunities. A lot of companies have continually missed opportunities. The original AT&T missed opportunities. And so what happens then is that everyone goes, oh, well, all innovation only comes from little startups. And that's not necessarily true. While startups are obviously a great source of innovation, and it's fascinating there's a thing called an innovation cluster. And when you look at some of these big companies, such as Philips in the Netherlands, or look at Kodak, in the towns they were typically in mid-sized cities, what you find is a lot of innovation, a lot of startups take place, but using technology and ideas which come from, if you like, disaffected employees of those companies. So there were these people from Kodak, for example, or people from, obviously a lot of Chicago companies as well, who were frustrated because the corporation wouldn't listen to them. And so they set off their own kinds of businesses. There's a company called ASML, which was a spin-off from Philips. It's one of the most fascinating companies. We talk about all the microchips and so on being made mostly in Asia, some here, etc. The reality is virtually 100% of all microchips in the world, wherever they're made and whoever makes them, are made using ASML machines. They actually print the microchips. And ASML there were these guys at Philips, which is kind of a stodgy, big, both primarily B2B actually, but also consumer products company. Great technology, but they've never been a ball of fire in terms of dynamic stuff. But they have brilliant ideas because they're brilliant people. And these people went and founded ASML in Eindhoven, down the road from Philips, and basically have a de facto monopoly, not through anything nefarious, but simply because their technology is just so awesome. And in fact, their North American headquarters are just down the road from me in Connecticut, in Wilton. But there's a classic example of an idea which Philips didn't run with, but became a multi-billion-dollar high-tech company because the guys who wanted to do it weren't allowed to do it within the big corporation. So they set up their own big corporation, or what's now a big corporation.
We got a live wire today. I mean, we're on a live wire topic that's going to resonate across, or should be resonating across, all aspects of B2B marketing here. But I want to back up for just a sec. Your background is massive, to say the least. So you've done everything from engineering to marketing to global business. When you walk into a boardroom or a classroom, how do you introduce yourself?
If I'm not careful, I speak for too long. Now, I mean, it's interesting. I think of myself very much as someone who has a STEM background. As you point out, sort of from an academic point of view, I'm a scientist and engineer, but then I went into marketing, which over to the dark side, as I sometimes joke. But I think it's always coming from a point of being data-driven while at the same time creative. I mean, Albert Einstein was pretty creative, but he was a scientist. Scientists and engineers can be creative. I admire, there's some incredible stuff done by engineers, which is incredibly creative. We tend to think of engineers as being the guys who build bridges. Well, you look at some of the bridges around the place, and there are some amazing innovations in bridge building compared to what a bridge used to be like 100 years ago. They now build bridges which have longer arches and higher altitudes than any time in history. And that's because there's innovation taking place. So the fact that you have a basic underpinning knowledge of that industry, and again, whether it's in the food business or any business, if you understand the technology, it's enabling. I always say when I look at startups or any business, you shouldn't be driven by the technology. That's what Concorde was, driven by the technology. Great artistic achievement, commercial failure. What you should be driven by is the need, and then you use the technology to enable that need. And this is why the 747, which was roughly contemporaneous to the Concorde, they made thousands of them, whereas Concorde, they made, I think, 12. Because the need was not to get people pay thousands of dollars to get from A to B in 2 hours, but the need was for people to pay hundreds of dollars in large quantities and move people long distances in bulk. And so understanding that need becomes important, which is why, to me, the marketing background is so critical. Because if you don't understand what the need is, and will come to need, then you don't understand, then you cannot do anything, however much technology you have. You're going to be doing the wrong thing, basically.
So, Richard, there's a lot to unpack here in everything you just said. I heard that corporations don't necessarily listen when their team are coming up with big ideas. I also heard that maybe there's other reasons why they're resistant. And then everything you were just saying about need or problem solving also seems to get ignored or isn't taken seriously. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and let me give, again, it's back to the understanding, getting down. But one of the things I've always done is, however senior I was, I always mingled with customers. And by the way, I'm one of those irritating people who, when I'm standing in a supermarket line, I'm talking to the person in front of me saying, oh, that looks interesting. Why did you buy that? Tell me about it. And several times in my life, I've driven across the United States. I've driven across Europe, for that matter, too, doing the same kind of thing. I stop off the beaten track, go to a small town, go to a locally owned motel, go to the local diner in the morning, sit at a counter and have breakfast and talk to people. It's amazing what you get versus doing standard market research or living in a big city all the time, just doing that. I remember one example, a classic B2B example, when I was in the electricity business, the branding electrons business. I remember I was with one of our salespeople. We went to visit a steel company. And the steel company was sitting there saying, well, of course, we use arc furnaces, electric arc furnaces, which they use an electric arc to generate the heat and make the steel. And I was going, yeah, it sounds fascinating. And this is where listening comes in. And he said, of course, it's so incredibly inefficient. We spend a lot of money converting electricity from AC to DC. And I said, well, tell me more. And he said, well, we use DC electricity for these electric arcs, not AC. And you supply us with AC. And so we have to use a converter. Now, the converters they use, rectifiers, they call them, are incredibly inefficient. You'll get maybe a 10% yield if you're converting AC to DC. So it makes electricity very expensive.
That doesn't sound good.
But that's what you do, and there's a reason why why AC is used for power transmission. It's much more efficient over long distances. With DC, you don't have the range. So we said, well, what if we put a generating facility close to your factory? Because you're a pretty big factory. And we can provide you with DC electricity as opposed to shipping AC electricity from 100 miles away and having without much losses, and then have you convert it and you have a 90% loss on it. And he goes, that's an idea. I'd never thought of that. Well, gee, our sales guy had never thought of that. Oh, we'd never thought of it. So we put a relatively small generator outside his factory door. And by the way, let's take another example, tin cans. If you're a Campbell Soup company or anyone who puts things in cans, you don't have your cans shipped in from 100 miles away. You get them, if you're big enough, you get them to build a tin can factory the other side of the road, and you have a little tunnel or so, or bridge or something coming over supplying you with tin cans. So it's there on the spot. You're not warehousing stuff. So this is an example of understanding what your customer needs, what your customer wants. So and by the way, in a lot of B2B things, that even involves understanding what their customer, who may be the consumer, needs. So because sometimes I've been in a situation talking to a very large beverage company, which shall be nameless, which provides stuff in red cans and bottles to a large extent, and sitting there saying, well, what is it your customer needs? They said, oh, one of our big problems, and I was actually working for a can manufacturer at the time, and I was consulting to them. And one of the things they said, well, we want cans which are a little bit stronger, but also lighter. So how about designing a can which has greater structural rigidity with less material? Sounds fairly obvious, but no one had asked that question and no one had made the suggestion before until we went through that whole long discussion, kind of open-ended discussion.
Now, I won't bring up the term AB InBev then, so makers of the red can stuff. But I want to circle back on something that you just are really hitting upon here, which is, if I'm hearing a common thread here, it's that identifying the real problem we need to solve is what's missing in a lot of context these days, or why there's a lot of inertia for doing that. So I want to go right there. Because we hear the word innovation and executives say throwing sticky notes at the wall, they're talking about AI like it's a magic wand, but you say the root cause is that companies don't actually know what the problem is. That's very problematic, I think. That's really interesting, I think, too.
I think that summarizes it beautifully. They really don't. And by the way, it isn't the only. You may spark an idea from what you have inside. Then you have to validate it. You have to identify it. And talking to your customers is the only important way. Yes, you can do a structured quantitative survey, which the response rate's dropping and dropping and dropping these days because people do too much of that. Every time you buy anything from CVS, they send you yet another questionnaire each time, or anyone does that. Your
Every
doctor
time.
does that. Everyone does it.
It's annoying.
And it's ridiculous. It is annoying. You're right. And it doesn't serve any purpose whatsoever. It's just a ritual we go through to say we're customer focused. And then they irritate the customer just to prove they're customer focused.
And I'm hoping they
like
just
that.
use that data. I don't believe for a minute that they do.
No, they don't. They don't. No one ever sees that data. It just goes in.
The ritual we go through, isn't that something?
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes there are ideas. I was working with another company, which shall be nameless, which had immense technology on mass manufacturing little things, precision manufacturing of little things, and they were in an industry. I mean, they were supplying things to an industry. And then you sit there and you look to see what other little things are there which need to be precision manufactured. And you actually look at it, some medical devices are that way. Now, they were not in the medical device business. So it was like, not high-tech electronic medical devices, no X-ray machines or MRI machines, but the little things that go into people's bodies, the screws, the joints and things like that. Can you do that? And so there was one where the idea was sparked from, gosh, you have the know-how to do it. Then is there a need for that? And are the people who are supplying that right now as good as you are at manufacturing? No, they're not. So you can actually do better at doing these things than the current people in the market. So that's another example where maybe the idea was sparked internally, but by going out there and exploring, observing, using that kind of stuff, you can come up with ideas.
And looking for adjacent industries where you can fulfill a need, which is kind of where you started the conversation.
Absolutely. That's so often the case. What are you understanding your strengths and understanding the market? Because there may be a need out there which you can't fill because you're not very good at it. Whatever that may be, it may be supply chain strength, it may be manufacturing strength, it may be all sorts of different kinds of strength. But either way, those are the kinds of things which I think are really important in order to be innovative. And whether you're an entrepreneur or an extrapreneur or an entrepreneur, and I want to come back to that point in a minute, understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are, understanding what the needs are and being able to validate them is important. And that's where, it's interesting, we tend to assume that entrepreneurship is synonymous with innovation. It's not. They're often two very different things. I know someone who started off many years ago doing a landscaping business, basically, mowing lawns. He started off in high school mowing lawns. That's actually how he started. But he's built a very substantial business now by doing what most landscapers don't do. He is very good at customer service. He's fairly expensive, but you call him, he will return the calls, or someone will return the call. He has a CRM system set up to do what no other landscaper does. He's actually he's economical. He's not cheap, but nor is he ultra expensive because he's very efficient, very organized, timesheets, customer tracking, and that kind of stuff. So there's an example of someone who is an entrepreneur, but not an innovator, other than just doing things really well. And then you get, Albert Einstein was an innovator, but he wasn't an entrepreneur. So let's understand that you can be an entrepreneur without being an innovator, and you can be an innovator without being an entrepreneur. So that's why I like entrepreneurship a lot. One of the reasons being people tend not to give it credit. Everyone goes, "Oh, entrepreneurs, they're the innovators, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Elon Musks, they're the innovators." And that's true, they are the innovators. But how about the D. Hock, who invented the revolving charge card way back when? Talk about an innovator. That he was within Bank of America when he did that. Or, you think of all the ideas. 3M is full of them. I mean, you turn around, so many 3M products are the result of innovation because they had a culture to innovation. They had a set of principles called the McKnight Principles, which was named after a CEO back in the, I guess, 1950s, which was very focused on entrepreneurship and really encouraged it. So it can be done. What happened to Kodak did not have to happen. They had the digital camera before anyone else had the digital camera, and they decided that they weren't going to introduce it because it would cannibalize the sale of film. Oh, if we introduced digital cameras, we were not going to sell a lot of film. Well, guess what? Other people introduced it.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
I think one of your key points, if I'm hearing correctly here, is that innovation isn't a brainstorming exercise. It's a diagnostic process.
Diagnostic and then procedural. You've got to have a culture which welcomes it. You've got to have a culture which rewards people. I spent some time at Mars Incorporated, which, believe it or not, despite the fact we think of it as candy, also has a substantial B2B business. But I remember I was working on a project, and they decided not to continue it. But you know what? I got a bonus for being on a, quote, fails project because we had done a good job of identifying and actually in the long run saved the company money by saying, no, it doesn't justify the return. That was rewarded in that company.
Well, you bring up another really good point. Whose responsibility is it in a company to be listening to clients and customers, to be watching the market, to be looking at adjacent industries where there might be opportunity? Or is it a team of people across several different departments? How does this work to make it work?
It is a team, but it has to be top down. If you have a CEO who hides in an office or only meets with his or her peers, it's not going to happen because people pick up on invisible signals. And so if you have a CEO who's distant from the marketplace, everyone picks that up. They know the CEO isn't interested. The CEO needs to get out there. Obviously not all the time, but a CEO, one of the things that the Japanese have always been very good at, for example, at Canon, I believe it's Canon, where the CEO will a couple of times a year go and work, or used to go and work in a camera shop. They'd have at Honda, and they would have the CEO would go out and do what they called a ride-along, which is you just find a consumer and you spend a day riding around with the consumer. And that sends a signal because if the CEO at Procter & Gamble, the top management go and do store checks and they actually get out there. So that what happens is if you work for that CEO and you know that even though the CEO is probably only doing it occasionally, that they are informed about it and they can at least know enough to ask you the questions, you're going to do it too.
And that never goes away. I have worked in e-commerce since the very beginning, and I mean the very beginning. And there's a little company called Wayfair. You may have heard of them.
Yes, absolutely.
I knew Wayfair and Niraj Shah when they were like 15 million and under in sales. And the reason they became Wayfair is because at the start of the company, there was 7 people, including Niraj, and they all spent 8 hours a day in the call center, and he did his CEO stuff at night. And even when they got to be several hundred million before they did the big IPO, years ago, he would actually go down and spend part of his day in the call center on calls, hearing first line what the customers had to say. It just reiterates everything you've been talking about.
And I have a feeling that a lot of our listeners right now are like banging their heads against the wall because I know marketers particularly want to get out there. They want to do ride-alongs with the sales team. They want to get out there and talk to customers. They want to bring up some of these things to make sure they're understanding pain points and challenges. And often they're told no, or they're overloaded with, daily responsibilities that won't serve the company as well. I think that's a huge problem.
Yep, driving the business sideways.
There you go.
There's an awful lot of that.
I think it means to be on a coffee cup. Don't drive the business sideways.
That's why also it isn't just the job of the marketing people, because one of the things that some of the Japanese are particularly good at is sending the techies out to talk to customers.
Interesting.
I remember, many years ago, one of my sort of claims to fame was I actually launched the first broadband service, named it broadband. And at the time, there were articles coming out saying Richard Guha is insane. It'll never catch on. No one knows what it means. And by the way, they still don't know what it means, but it
No,
doesn't
but it's
matter.
cool.
It's magic. It's magic. We have broadband. But I remember when we were looking at that, our CTO, I said, I want you to sit in the back room and listen to some focus groups. And he said, why would I want to do that? I'm the expert, not them. Anyway, I kind of forced him to do that. And he sat there, and after a few hours of that, he walked down and said, oh my God, he said, thank God you forced me to do that. He said, there's so much I didn't know. He said, I know more than they do, but they're the ones who are actually paying the money, so I better adjust to what they are thinking. It's like, yeah, absolutely. I want the techies, I want the finance people even, not very often, but I want everyone to have an understanding of the customer, the consumer, whatever it is, as well as what we have inside. I don't want, one of the things, and there's actual academic research which shows salespeople are the worst source of market research you have. Salespeople tend to have wishful thinking in some parts because they want to hear things. Customers tend to tell them things for a strategic advantage, so they won't ever tell a customer, oh, your price is too low.
Right.
Equally, salespeople sometimes report back something which so they will come back. Always, a salesperson who doesn't say, "Oh, your price is too high," isn't worth their salt. They'll always say that, even if it's not true, because that's what they want to believe, that if you cut the price, they'll sell more. So salespeople, they're great sources of information backwards and forwards, but because they fall within a formal channel, you need other people. It is surprising when a techie goes out to meet with someone, how often, and particularly the customers' technical people, the technical people say, boy, your price is so low, we find it difficult to believe you're that good. They'd never tell a salesperson that, never. So that's another advantage when you have team, at the beverage companies, when they're dealing with the fast food chains, McDonald's, Burger King, whoever, they have huge teams. Coca-Cola has 50 or 60 people working with McDonald's, but they're salespeople, they're marketing people, they're finance people, they're logistics people, and they each match with the person in the other thing, and they start working together as a seamless team. And that's where the ideas often come from these informal brainstorming sessions, and then when they're just sort of shooting the breeze, sitting around talking about stuff.
And I also think, to your point a minute ago, getting the sales team to kind of think a little differently. I worked for a very large manufacturing company, and the sales team was always telling them their prices were too high. They needed to lower their prices. And we went back at it and said, when you're out in the field, you need to not take the statement or the question at face value.
Yeah.
Ask or think about what's behind the question, because that's where we found the need, and that's where we found the pain points, and that's how we came to solutions. So it's really getting the mindset, particularly in B2B marketing, of the sales team to kind of think a little differently, and that's hard.
The sales team is in B2B marketing. That's one big difference between that and let's say a direct-to-consumer. I mean, I've done work for some direct-to-consumer people in the past, and that's a very different thing. But when you're dealing with, and by the way, one of the interesting things is when I joined Procter & Gamble, one of the things someone pointed out to me, we don't sell a single package of anything direct to a consumer. Our customer is a business, i.e. is the retailer. So if your retail marketing is not very good, you're not going to even reach that consumer. And it is interesting how people sometimes don't understand that sometimes even within a consumer products company, there's a substantial B2B component which they ignore at their own risk. You've got to accept that a B2B, unless you're an Amazon or something like that, is probably a part of your business. I mean, there are some situations where you actually have direct B2B customers, even if you're in a consumer products company. But when you're selling to a consumer, you're not really selling to a consumer. Kraft macaroni and cheese is sold to Kroger, is sold to a Ralph's or someone like that. It's not, and then but yes, you have to understand the consumer. You have to address the consumer in terms of your advertising and marketing. But you sure as hell better understand that with the customer. Even, for example, when you're dealing with retailers these days, if you're a CPG company, this whole thing of shelf space management and category captains and so on, that is a pure B2B construct. It is nothing else. You have to understand that. You have to understand if retailers are changing, maybe you can help them change. Maybe you can actually go to a retailer and suggest ways they can make their thing more efficient, which has happened in the case of certainly Procter & Gamble's done that many occasions.
You're talking about CPG here. I like talking about CPG folks. Are you seeing more examples of, say, a company like Clorox who is basically B2B selling to B2C through the retailer? But what they're doing is they're going beyond to learn the customer behavior at the store level or the omnichannel level to come back and say, okay, now retail chain, here's what we as the manufacturer can help you do to drive product right there on the store floor.
Absolutely. I mean, I was part of the team that started up and on the board of a company called Retail Next, which is retail analytics. They use cameras set up in the stores
I know those
to
guys.
track behavior. Yeah. And, but the reality is there are three customers for the data. One of the customers is the company who puts their stuff there. So yes, Coca-Cola and Kraft may be interested in customers. But obviously and they are very important customers. And then there's a retailer. But just so you're selling the same data, but sliced and diced in different ways. The retailer wants to know how to attract the consumer to buy in their store. If I'm Coca-Cola, I want them to buy Coca-Cola with them at the store. By the way, the same applies if I'm in McDonald's. McDonald's is in charge of bringing the people in the store. Coca-Cola is in charge of getting the people once in their store to buy Coca-Cola as opposed to drink water. So that in that same environment, you have two different marketers, each operating. And so getting that analytics and getting to understand what happens there is really important. B2B used to be a very, not that long ago, and still in many cases is a somewhat gut feel, no hard data stuff because, we don't have the data or the sample size is too small. And that is very different now, very different. If you're Cisco selling servers to someone or other, you absolutely are data driven and you have that data. So use it for heaven's sake.
Absolutely. I don't even think they all share the data, let alone use it correctly. So I think, that's a big message today is, make sure everybody's got access to the data.
And that feeds back into innovation because the more you know your business, the more you're able to find solutions. And that's what innovation is. It's finding solutions. The solutions may be a warehousing innovation. The innovation may be a packaging innovation. The innovation may be a data innovation. It may be a completely new product or an old product sold in different ways. I'll give you an example of a silly example in many ways, and that it's funny, but it isn't funny. It's actually quite serious. I was at one time in the rice business at Mars because Ben's rice is a Mars product. And what would happen was we would mill the hulls off the rice and we'd end up with all these hulls. And so years ago, they would throw it away. Then someone said, well, maybe we can burn those hulls and co-generate energy to help us run the process. Yeah, great. That's a good idea. And then someone said, we have all that ash. Can we use that ash in something? Oh, yeah. So we started figuring out ways in which we could use the ash. We thought about using it perhaps as kitty litter, supplying kitty litter people because it's absorbent. We thought of using it in foundries because when you cast hot metals, you cast it into a basically sand bed. How about if you put kitty litter, mix it in with the sand, and sand, very high quality sand, can be fairly expensive. Can you do that? So we were sitting there. And by the way, we had a B2B business and we were supplying restaurants. It has a leading market share in restaurants and food service. And that's actually how the product started, supplying the military in the Second World War for their feeding purposes. But the reality is all those things sort of come together when you sit there and you go, oh, yeah, what if we do this? We have a byproduct. How can we use the byproduct? Oh, we can use it this way. Oh, we have a byproduct from that too. How can you keep on doing that? So keeping your mind open is really, really important. And so many people don't. If a company's in decline, it's probably not because people down there don't have an idea, although it can happen, but typically because management is not open to them and they send these signals. which even if they don't say it, they may say, we want innovation, and then they punish people who take risks. Whoa, then you've suddenly killed that one.
But see, I didn't hear the word byproduct from what you were just talking about there, Richard. What I heard was sustainability.
Yeah.
Which is a huge driver of everything today. And here you are talking about sustainability from kind of back in the day. I find that fascinating.
What's fascinating to me, too, is that this conversation has been talking about finding uses, maybe in an adjacent agency, by just looking at the marketplace and looking at, what we're actually manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And we haven't touched on product launches. Nope. Which is really like what the bread and butter in the B2B industry is today. And your whole conversation had nothing to do with product launches and product changes.
Well, product launches and product changes in a way are a subset of that.
Correct, yeah.
This is, everyone, you're right. People look at the product launches and they're the tip of the spear, but there's a whole rest of the spear.
Yes, I like the rest of the spear.
Yeah, and when I was in the software business, it was interesting. The company, which was founded in the early 1990s, was one of the most successful IPOs. Was the most successful IPO at the time, which was was at 96, 97 it IPO'd, but it started off as a very simple product which tracked things, is the only way to put it. It was called workflow management, so it tracked workflow.
Yep.
And they started off with a very simple, relatively low-cost module. Walmart bought it and used it to track things, and it cost them probably $10,000. By the end of 3 or 4 years, there were we thought of so many more uses for it, that Walmart was paying millions of dollars a year because they could. We helped them think of other things to use it for, but they also said, "Oh, we can use it for that. Oh, we can use it for this." And it's still, the company has since been acquired, but it's still in, I think, probably about 2/3 of the Fortune 500 companies, and it's the Remedy software. And people forget there was once a company. But it started off as a single product company that became a multi-product company, multi-customers, supplying mostly Fortune 500 companies. So it's amazing what happens when you take one piece of innovation and then you just expand how you can use it. You add features and you constantly change. You constantly play with it. You can't sit still in this business. Even if you're selling, it is amazing just how many things. We look at commodities, and I mentioned that rice hull ash, as a commodity, but commodities can be turned into value added if you think of it enough. There's a grid I sometimes use to explain how you can categorize commodity products. And commodity products, on one axis, you have what percentage of the finished product's price this material represents, and the other is what percentage of the functionality applies to that. And if you plot this grid on 4 things, and it's difficult to envisage, but on one level you have something which is a relatively critical. So if you have titanium added to iron, you have a specialty steel. And so it becomes a strategic material. That's why the price is so very high, because actually the price isn't that important to the steel manufacturer because they're using such a tiny percentage of it. Same with a lot of catalysts, the same way. And then you get other things, obviously, then you get service products, things like pencils and paper and so on, the classic service products. You really don't care. And no one worries too much about it. And then you get the pure commodities, which are large quantities. I buy sand, or I buy iron ore, or I buy coal. It's a large percentage of the price, not very important to the product. That's the coveted position is to be a strategic material. Strategic means you are very, very important. You're high priced and you're absolutely critical. And that's where you want to try and move yourself. So if you start off in any one of the other boxes, service materials or commodities particularly, you want to move yourself up to strategic, because now people, some of these rare earths, for example, which we've now suddenly realized are absolutely critical and incredibly expensive, they're absolutely there. And he's like, do you think the people who cornered the market on rare earths, as it were, didn't realize that? Of course they did. That's why they did it.
Yeah. Richard, we have learned so much from you today. I think we're going to have you back.
I think we're going to have him back.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't thank you enough. This has been a master class in really kind of just thinking outside the box, you know?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's always nice to have the opportunity to ramble.
No, that was not rambling. That was concise, actionable business intelligence and passing on wisdom to our audience.
Yeah, and I think they're going to need to listen to this a few times.
I think you're right.
Well, I'm always happy to talk about some of these things because honestly, I mean, the point we were talking about, some of these things aren't new. People were doing some of these things 100 years ago, but they just hadn't codified it. They just didn't know why they were so successful. And I think one of the key things in this is to understand what is the formula. And formula is a horrible word in some ways because it makes it sound as though it's unimaginative. But what is the key to making this happen? And I think anyone can do it. There is no business out there which cannot be innovative and grow their business if it has the right mindset and the right capabilities.
Or maybe they just need you. So
yeah, exactly.
If our listeners wanted to learn more or hire you even, where would they reach you?
I can be emailed at richard@guha.us, and that's probably the best way. I'm findable on LinkedIn. I'm easily findable in one form or another. I mean, either LinkedIn or that email is fine.
Excellent.
I'm always happy to pass on some of my generic knowledge at any rate. I mean, I'm always very careful. If I don't know your business, it's difficult for me to be specific, but certainly from a generic point of view, like I've been talking now. I think your podcast is a great idea, by the way. I was thinking about how few, and it's not just podcasts, how few resources there are on B2B marketing. I know a number of people who see themselves as B2B specialists and have written books about B2B and so on. But overall, there are far more books which are written about consumer marketing. And as I say, actually, they're not as different as all that, but people make them different. And I think that a resource like yours is wonderful
Excellent.
For anyone in B2B marketing.
Well, we'll take that compliment. Thank you so much. And I think we're going to be seeing you again really soon.
And we're going to put that on a coffee cup. So
there you go. Another coffee cup.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And I would ask all of our listeners to rate us, right? Go on, tell us how we're doing. We'd love to understand more, particularly after a session like this where we all learned so much. Tell us what you think. In the meantime, I'd also like to thank our sponsors. I'd like to thank Embas. They're a marketing consulting firm, and they specialize in change management, marketing communications, and content. And then I'd also like to thank the Motion Agency. The Motion Agency has most recently been ranked the #2 fastest growing agency in the U.S. They are just amazing, so please give them a look if you need some B2B help. Until next time, everybody, take care.
And no bull.
Don't take anybody's bull, as Mark just told us. And we'll talk again soon.